Now, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases is reporting 7,983 new COVID-19 cases in the country, and this is over the latest reporting period. And it brings the cumulative number of cases in South Africa to over 2,613,000. A further 299 COVID-19 related deaths have also been reported in the latest 24-hour cycle, and it brings the total number of fatalities since the start of the pandemic to 77,440. Now, there have been growing concerns over what seems to be a decline in the number of people presenting themselves to get vaccinated, with just under 160,000 vaccine doses being administered in the past 24-hour period. And this has led to some retailers and other institutions offering incentives for vaccinated people. Now, they include game stores, which is currently offering a 10% discount as a reward for consumers who present proof of vaccination. Thezi Mabuza is the acting consumer commissioner at the National Consumer Commission, and she joins us now for more on this. Thezi, good to speak to you again. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina, and morning to your viewers.
So, just your initial comment around retailers and other institutions who are now offering consumers incentives for having received the jab.
We think, Sakina, that is a great move because it's in support of government's initiatives to ensure that all of us are vaccinated and we ensure that at least we make sure that we get that herd immunity. And I think that because now when we go to the stores and then we know that we are vaccinated, we are also trying to protect the people that are offering a service to us.
And I think whilst perhaps understandable that everyone would love to find us in a situation where we reach herd immunity as quickly as possible, there are, of course, always ethical questions that arise around the offering of incentives for people to get vaccinated. And when we look at that, especially as it now starts to impact things like, for example, insurance cover, how does the Commission view that? Discovery, I think it was, were the first to come out, and they said that they would in fact incentivize those who actually had been vaccinated. From your perspective, is that a good thing, or is that purely discriminatory?
Sakina, let me just bring you back to what the Consumer Protection Act calls discrimination or unfair discrimination in the marketplace. What the Act says in Section 8, it says that a supplier of goods or services must not unfairly exclude, grant preferential treatment, charge a different price to any category of persons when they are being offered services by the supplier. And then it also goes in a little bit further and says on one or more of the grounds of unfair discrimination contemplated in Section 9 of the Constitution, and those grounds that becomes discriminatory, they will be on the issues of race, your gender, your sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, and so forth. And the Act also goes further to say that, in Section 9, to say that it would not be a discriminatory practice if a supplier would offer either a preferential treatment on certain category of people, especially we would see that on issues of age, when there will be those incentives for people over the age of 60. Or maybe they set aside or reserve certain services like your jungle gyms to children, or maybe segregate people when they use ablution facilities. So it's not discrimination on those grounds. So for us, discrimination will be based on those bases that are laid in Section 9 of the Constitution.
But, of course, one could argue that the Constitution, at the time of its drafting, did not anticipate a COVID-19 situation that had the entire world on lockdown, where people are now expected to get vaccinated. Would that not be a fair argument that perhaps the Constitution is not up to date with the current developments?
Yes, Sakina, it will seem like that, but remember then that if something is mandatory, let's say, issues of age, wherein a supplier would say that I cannot sell a particular commodity, let's say cigarettes or alcohol or liquor, to minors, because it is mandatory in terms of the law to say that the minors cannot access or cannot be sold liquor. It will be the same thing if it was mandatory for people to get vaccinated. Then it would not be unfair discrimination if a supplier would be saying that you can only access those goods if you are vaccinated. But in this case, because now this is an incentive, the first prize that goes on is that are people being denied access to goods on the basis that they have not been vaccinated? In this case, no. And then the pricing as well. If the price of a particular commodity, let's say you're buying bread, it's 13 rand and the supplier sells bread to everybody for 13 rand, then it's not discriminatory. But then if the supplier goes ahead and say that if you meet certain conditions, we will see that sometimes suppliers would even offer incentives if you have a club store, or maybe if you have your credit card, and say that if you are a club member, then we will give you an additional 5%. And in that case, it doesn't become discriminatory. It just becomes an incentive for a certain group of people.
And I think that's a great way of explaining it. But just to bring further clarity, let's be specific in terms of what is being offered. In my introduction, I spoke about the discount that Game is offering. But if you look at one of the first businesses in South Africa to get on to this incentive scheme, you had Discovery, and they were basically saying that any client applying for a new premium will have their vaccination status taken into account. So perhaps for the benefit of our viewers, is that discriminatory, or again, does that fall within the confines of what is permissible?
In this case, it will be a preferential treatment, but for us now, because it's not something that is mandatory, in that case, we'll look at it and say, is it really discriminating against a certain group of people or unfairly prejudicing them? But if it's not, because again, when you're looking at premiums and insurance, it is risk-based. So in that case, I think that the supplier that will be able, or the regulator that will be able to say, based on their offerings and their regulation, it will be the Financial Sector Conduct Authority in terms of risk-based products or financial products. So in my case, I would be able to actually say what the Commission says around goods and services within the confines of the Consumer Protection Act.
So as far as you've had the opportunity to view, Thezi, in as far as people perhaps complaining to the Commission, have you received any such complaints where people are alleging unfair discrimination with regard to their vaccination status at this point?
At this point, Sakina, we haven't received any complaints, and I am certain that in future, if we do, and then we feel that there is really an unfair practice, as a commission, we have the mandate to look at that, and then also to refer that, working with our fellow regulators like the Human our own Chapter 9 institution in terms of the Human Rights Commission, we are able to work with them, but we can still refer matters as well directly to the Equality Court if it falls within our ambit of services being denied to people based on their vaccination status.
Well, an interesting one, and thanks so much, Thezi Mabuza, for your time this morning. Thezi is the acting Consumer Commissioner at the National Consumer Commission, and talking to us about these incentives being offered. And of course, there are further conversations to be had around the ethics of this. But as you heard, from a consumer perspective, not necessarily as cut and dry as one would think that it is discriminatory, whereas very often there may be, preferential treatment. I was just thinking, if you could take out insurance, for example, and you are a smoker, you are profiled already. So this would probably fall in line with the already established practice that we do see.